And the eagle has landed yet again. It's Tuesday night. How are you, everybody? It's welcome to Narrative Live. Eric Garland is here. I was promoting you as a Russian-sanctioned futurist today, and people quite like that. So it might be a new moniker.
I'll take whatever job title. I mean, that'll do.
It's a pretty good one. We've had a lot of news going on in the last just few hours, and we have such a big show planned. So we're thanking you for joining us tonight, and it's going to be jam-packed with interesting things for you tonight. Coming up at around 7:30, we'll talk to Brandon Wolf, who's a survivor of the Pulse nightclub. We're going to talk about the delay it took for police to act in that shooting. That's the Pulse nightclub that took place in Orlando. And it was 3 hours, the delay there. It was 90 minutes in Uvalde. But why are there so many delays in responding to active shooters in these big active shooting events that take place? We'll talk about that with Brandon at 7:30. But we have big breaking news tonight in that Michael Sussman, the Clinton lawyer, indirect Clinton lawyer, was found not guilty by a court for not lying to the FBI. He did not lie to the FBI, according to this court. You want to jump in?
No, just yes. The jury found that there was a potential reasonable level of doubt about it was not beyond a reasonable doubt that that he made false statements to the FBI. It was a very complicated case, but that's the decision they came to, and given the complications of it, I could see my way to it.
Yeah, I mean, look, it doesn't say that all the Durham cases are irrelevant. It says that this particular case the system worked the way it should work. Someone was accused of something. There was an investigation. They went to trial. They were found not guilty, and that's the way it's meant to work. In fact, it's exactly the way the system should always work when people are corrupt or might be corrupt, and that's what we like to. We aspire to with all the investigation going on around January the 6th. We hope that the same kind of strong, investigation happens there as well. Certainly no one should be allowed off the hook for anything that they've done with regards to January the 6th, or if they've done anything to fabricate information regarding an election, which is what this case was really about. Because what Durham is alleging in his broad cases is that there was a series of events that ultimately were fabricated in order to get the FBI weaponized into the 2016 election on behalf of the Clinton campaign against Trump. Now, we all know that it also worked in reverse. Apparently, the Trump campaign also weaponized the FBI against the Clinton campaign. That's how we got the Wiener laptops. In both cases, equally wrong, equally shouldn't happen if they indeed happened. And if they did happen, we should find out so the FBI doesn't do it again. And I think that's probably the biggest point behind all of these Durham investigations, is that there is an enormous amount of concern around the FBI's involvement in elections in general. We want them, of course, to investigate any criminal activity, but can they be the arbiter of every election, and can they be guaranteed not to be interfered with by opposition parties or doing opposition research? It's very, very difficult, and it puts them in an impossible situation where they can't be unbiased, and they're just victims of these constant attempts to try and feed them information which may not be true or accurate.
I mean, which happens all the time. There's, for example, organized crime syndicates that tell on each other all the time. They get a really good source about one of their competitors, and they feed that to the FBI. This is nothing new to the Bureau, that somebody may be telling you something true or false, and their heart might not be in the right place. They might not just be there as a concerned citizen, but with an agenda. Mm-hmm. The FBI is used to that with criminals all the time. Here you had a couple of political parties that, of course, Trump had that whole lock her up thing going, right? Mm-hmm. And so when, mid-year exam, the investigation into her emails, or maybe some more emails or whatnot, that was, I believe, opened up by Peter Strzok in mid-2016. That lended to that narrative. But then we've found out through John Durham's investigation here of how the world came to be talking about the Alpha Bank story and the so-called Steele dossier that was sort of tarted up to look like an intelligence product when it really wasn't, and that it was fed to the media constantly throughout the 2016 cycle. the investigation was, well, how did that get started?
Mm.
And we've already got, of course, as we've covered on this show, there's already been one guilty plea from Kevin Kleinsmith, who was the direct report of James A. Baker, who was the general counsel of the FBI, to whom Michael Sussman gave information, and got it kicked off with, we saw the text message, hey Jim, it's me. We've got some really important stuff about Trump. I'm not representing any client. And then I guess the whole there is, for some reason, James Baker didn't take notes on the actual meeting, and he was a little fuzzy on, well, I can't remember exactly if he told me he had no client. And of course, everybody else around him that took notes, like Bill Priestap and the head of in charge of counterintelligence for the FBI, said, guys, here, it has no client. They took those notes, which Sussman's counsel wanted excluded. They're like, oh, just because he said there was no client, he wasn't really there, it's triple hearsay, which, okay, technicality, sure, triple hearsay, I got it. That's not a wrong legal argument that was in the pleadings. If you were one of the rare souls that actually read the pleadings in the case before making,
I know you were
making opinion statements in public. I mean,
you know what I find really interesting about the Baker situation is the Baker, he's a chief counsel and wasn't taking notes at a major meeting like that. What is going on? Why is he not taking notes, and why can't he remember things? Is a good question to be asked. And whether is there any, was this more of a, well, let's put it this way. Sussman himself had a card access to the FBI offices whenever he wanted. He was a regular there. They knew who he was working for. It wasn't really that much of a surprise. So why the case? The case might be to illuminate what was going on, for people to understand the details and the complexity of this scheme, which may or may not have happened. But it seems like we had Hillary Clinton admit through her campaign manager that they were aware of it, that she was aware of this attempt to feed this information. And all of that is very interesting. And it's really all a setup, not for this particular case, it's all a setup for the case that's coming in November. Now, that case in November is all about Igor, you're gonna have to Danchenko, thank you. So, and tell me about why that case is so different to this case, because that really revolves around the Steele dossier compared to this case, which was about the Alpha Bank server, a lesser sort of scandal, really.
Well, I really even want to reframe it there. It was about, did Michael Sussman, when he introduced this type of information to the FBI, was he clear that this was a law enforcement tip, or was he doing opposition research and just wanted to tell the FBI about the guy that they were running against? And they tried to make it look like, oh, he was just there for the purest of reasons. But there's, I think to the reasonable person that looks pretty absurd, and they even stop really trying to keep to that, that impression of the interactions between the Clinton campaign and the Bureau. But it all came down, as it should, it came down to, did this meet the three standards of 18 U.S. Code 1001, which is for making knowingly false statements to the federal government, which is a really important statute that the DOJ uses all the time. And it's, did you make a false statement that's demonstrably false or fraudulent? Was it material? Did it have an impact, or would anyone reasonably expect it to have an impact on how the federal government does its job? And was it knowing? Was it just a slip of the tongue? Or did you knowingly present that information? And, the jury felt that there was some doubt about whether those things had happened. From what I read, there was an enormous amount of circumstantial evidence. Personally, I'm a little skeptical on how you could say that this guy had the same story all the way through, since he told the CIA the same lie and then changed it for Congress and then changed it back for the CIA. It seems like it wasn't telling the truth. But the jury was looking at this in a very narrow context and said, well, hold on. Well, Baker can't quite remember what he said. And yes, we have the text where he said he didn't have a client, and other people around him didn't think he had a client, and he told other people he didn't have a client. But the question is, on the 19th of September, 2016, can we prove without beyond a shadow of a doubt that he made a false statement while in the meeting with Baker about opening up all this stuff. And, that got thin sliced. I guess they said no. Now,
Wait.
That, we did talk more about the Alpha Bag thing during this, as you were saying,
Yeah.
and less about the second part of the Fusion GPS opposition research operation. That is not a good guy, let's just try and catch criminals out there operation. We have an operation that does that. It's called, I think, the FBI, about catching criminals. And they like tips from citizens. But that's not what Fusion GPS was. I mean, they were working for the Russian government, looking at Bill Browder on behalf of Prevazon, money launderers that were accused in the Southern District of New York.
Well. I mean, you're looking at indicting Browder. Yes, sorry. No, I thought you were saying that they were working for Bill Browder, which they would not know.
No. Fusion GPS was in doing Oppo research on Bill Browder, apparently. So anyhow,
this is a laundering operation for opposition research that went through Fusion GPS into Perkins Coie, which was a legal law firm that was hired by the Hillary Clinton campaign. I mean, that's just the way it was. It's actually kind of normal, I think, for there to be opposition research units designed through that.
Oppo research, absolutely. Yeah, get the dirt.
Yeah.
And they should have tons of dirt. But when that stuff, if you have something, counterfeited and it ends up in a FISA warrant, that's different. And that was not on the table here in the Sussman case. Right. The Sussman case was just, did he lie about this being for the Clinton campaign? That was really it. There are some, very specific legal standards. The jury decided it didn't meet that. Well, come this fall, we've got Igor Danchenko, who was a Russian national who worked for Christopher Steele, who's a British national. And just a real quick reminder, foreigners are not supposed to be providing services to American campaigns or money or anything else. Just for everyone keeping score at home, you're not supposed to under American law. We had Chris Steele who was head of the Russia House. That's the Russian desk for MI6 spy agency in Britain. And he was subcontracting to a couple dudes in Washington to get his dirt about Trump in Moscow, where he was a spy. Which seems weird, but there were two guys that we know about now. Chuck Dolan, who used to be head of the Massachusetts Democratic Party and then part of the Clinton administration way back in the 90s, and this much younger man, Igor Danchenko. And Danchenko has been charged by the Durham Special Counsel. He has been indicted on 18 U.S. Code 1001, and we're going to be talking about, apparently the federal government believes that Danchenko has lied to, I believe, the investigators. Now, this is a little bit different than lying to somebody in a lightless, windowless office somewhere down at the FBI building down off of Pennsylvania Ave, right? In D.C. It's a little different here.
Right. Remember, Michael Flynn got in trouble for lying to investigators as well, and he lost his job as the national security advisor over that. Just to remind people,
lying to the feds is a bad idea.
You shouldn't do that. So it will be interesting to see what happens in this case. I mean, there are a lot of people saying, hey, this is an indictment on everything Durham did. I don't agree with that. I think there's a lot of very useful information that we got to learn about how the system works, and especially about how the FBI operates. And it's stuff that really is important. It's material to the future of free and fair elections in America, and we need to sort that out. We can't go through another presidential election where the FBI is manipulated in the way it was by both sides, it appears, in 2016. And we need to make sure that does not happen again.
Yeah, could I riff on that? Because, there's
for a minute or so, yeah.
A minute. We have a big show, folks.
Yeah,
so
we have a busy night.
But there are so many trolls and paid influencers, paid by very interesting individuals, some of whom we know about, some of whom we know less about, who have been from the beginning, boo, Durham, this guy, he's dirty, he's compromised. I know, I have an anonymous name with 15 digits after it and my Twitter handle, and I've never mentioned this case ever before. I tweet about shampoo, but I know that this is a compromised prosecutor. Right. All very interesting. And when the guy is acquitted by a jury, it's like, see, this is what that means. And it's like, we got to get out of the notion of, law enforcement as blood sport and just enforce the goddamn law. Don't break the law. If you break the law, go to prison or cut a plea deal. But, don't be defrauding the federal government. Don't be lying to federal investigators. Don't suck a bunch of data off your DARPA contract that was supposed to be for cybersecurity to try and launder it to Slate and the New York Times. That's illegal. Don't do that. If you do, go to prison.
Also, Also, I just, it's good for everyone to hear both sides of the story. This is really important. Yeah. This is how democracies function, is by actually listening to the other side. If we block the other side's, court cases, criminal cases, any allegations, then we'll end up with being just like them, just exactly like them, but on the other side. And that's not good for anybody. Democracy actually functions best when we listen to each other and cover each other's points of view.
And it's been hilarious, when people were like, but what about Trump and Russia? I'm like, who do you think started telling you about Trump and Russia in 2016? It was me. I know they kicked me in the teeth for years over it. And I was mentally ill then. And now apparently there's a problem with me because I don't bring it up enough. People, how much was I supposed to talk about it?
If you're also into Trump Russia, which, I had a passing interest in, I would say, you notice, I mean, like, I was amongst the first people to write about this stuff. And if you're interested in Trump Russia, which a lot of this audience is, you have to be interested in what's going to come out in the next trial and in this trial, because we'll find out all about the Steele dossier and how the Steele dossier was put together, which is a big piece of Trump Russia. So just as a matter of historic reference, this is all good stuff and worthy of everyone's time.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna.
And we're all over it, guys. Yeah. Trust us. We'll get you through it. There's one little quote, just a teaser for the audience.
One last one.
If you think so, that Sussman stuff was nothing. Okay, well, I got an interesting one for you in the Danchenko charging documents, where apparently PR Executive One, that's Chuck Dolan, is talking about Danchenko, who's going to be working for Steele, producing this dossier that they're going to give to the FBI, who's then going to put it in FISA warrants. Chuck Dolan's like, oh, well, he worked for the FSB, the Russian Domestic Intelligence Service, for a few years. LOL. That's like from some text. So I hope America's a little curious as to why Hillary Clinton would be, funding people that her own folks thought had been Russian spies. That's just very interesting to me.
Well, you are you're making some assumptions there, but that's good. You should be making those assumptions. You go right ahead. I'm going to move us on to the next story. Cletus? I'm not even sure how you say her name. Cleta, I think is how you say her name. The January 6th garage huddle. Cleta? Say it again.
Cleta, I think.
Cleta, okay. So this is an amazing story that sort of passed everyone by last week. There is video of a garage huddle involving none other than Enrico Tarrio, the leader of the Proud Boys, and the leader of the First Amendment.
Oath Keepers.
The Oath Keepers, sorry, so many different groups. The Oath Keepers. And also it appears that Cleta Mitchell is there. Now, who is Cleta Mitchell? You know that we've been talking about her best friend for a long time, Ginny Thomas. Ginny Thomas, very well-known person because she is the wife of a Supreme Court Justice, Clarence Thomas. She's also been one of the instigators of January 6th, or so is believed to have been one of the instigators of January the 6th, was involved in a lot of planning. She's good buddies as well with one Steve Bannon. In fact, she's also good buddies, and Cleta Mitchell is also good friends with Bannon as well. In fact, she was his lawyer quite recently. So it's interesting that apparently Cleta Tarrio and Stephen. Sure, why can't I remember his name? Stuart Rhodes.
Stuart Rhodes.
Thank you. And Stuart Rhodes were all in a huddle in a secret meeting the night that Enrique Tarrio was arrested. It was January the 5th, the night before the insurrection, and Enrique Tarrio had been taken in by the FBI. He had been arrested because a few weeks earlier, there was a Black Lives Matter poster that was defaced in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. Because of that, the FBI brought him in, or the local authorities brought him in and said, you've got to get out of town. We do not want you here for the next 24 hours or this period of time. There's going to be the January the 6th insurrection. And so he left town. But before he left town, he sort of broke the rules and he met up with Rhodes and he met up with Cleta. We think it's Cleta. You guys be the judge. In this underground garage meeting. The video comes from a documentary crew of all people. A documentary crew was following I don't know why he had a documentary crew following him, but there you go. Enrique Tarrio had a documentary crew following him and documenting absolutely everything that was going on with the man in that period of time. So we're going to watch all 4 gripping minutes of this. If you haven't seen it, it's because everyone was focused on another news story, and the Cleta Mitchell stuff is all brand new today. And we bring it up because she's in the news because she's planning on doing it all again with Jenny Thomas. She's basically announced it to the world, and we'll tell you a little bit more about that on the other side of this video. This is him getting signed out of the police department, or wherever he was detained.
Okay, right there. Right there. And right there. All right, that's it.
That's it?
All right, we have it all.
Thank you. Well, kind of thank you. Stop.
Oh, thank you. What are you hiding? She's got something to give us. Hold on, stop.
Are you f***ing kidding me? Yo,
They just canceled my reservation because they saw me with him. Here.
I'm going to be on the Baltimore side. On the north side of town.
okay, do you need anything?
Not really. What's this?
Do you need
What are you giving me this for?
money? Do you need anything?
No.
What's this for?
What's this for?
Tomorrow?
Tomorrow, you
can't
can't
come.
come. He's
No.
not. You're not gonna come anywhere near anything. I thought they
Those
told
are the
you
lanyards,
24
by the way.
hours.
Hold on.
24 hours what?
That you had 24.
No.
I mean, I don't even know if that's a rule.
Hey.
So I'm not even going to test it.
Bianca.
I wanted you to meet the attorney.
Why don't you pull up over
Just
here?
pull up
We
right
need
here.
to talk.
Hey.
Everybody move, please. Everybody move.
block on the right.
Why,
Go to the
man?
next block. Dude, you
sure?
have to go.
All
The
right.
next block.
Hey, can I keep one of these?
Yes, 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 yes.
Inspires a lot of confidence. But this is great stuff. This looks like a James Bond movie, an indie one at least.
Hey.
In a garage.
Austin Powers, maybe, but
This is important.
No, I can't.
No.
I can't. They're already looking out the window. So make a go down the block and make a right, and then on the left there's a parking. Yeah, there's a parking garage that's going to be on your left side. Go down the parking garage.
they were trying to.
Right here on the
Oh,
left.
one second. One second.
Fucking fugitive.
You are.
I'm not. I'm sure that there's like some type of hey, get your stuff.
Well, I
and
mean,
go.
you literally, I told him, I said he literally just got shit at the police station because she's gonna,
Yeah, just back up. We're just gonna. I
we're
just
gonna
need
just
to
turn
talk
around
to
and
her.
get out of here.
She has a. This guy has a good attorney, and it was a 2A attorney that got him off of his stuff. So.
I want you to meet this attorney, Kelly. She's from Texas.
Pleasure to meet you.
Yes. So isn't there
Hello.
And Stuart, glad you're here.
Pleasure's all mine.
Hey, listen. Do you need a vehicle to switch
No, we're gonna.
off?
We're
Do they
gonna,
know
we're
what you're
gonna move out.
driving?
Hello.
Do they know what you're driving?
It doesn't matter. I'm sure that even if they were to come by right now, I'm on my way out. So I literally just picked up my bags.
So I thought they told you
They
24
didn't
hours.
give me the 24 hours. They didn't want. The reason
I
why they
heard
did
that.
that is that they didn't want me to go to tomorrow's event. I'm good.
You going on Virginia side?
I'm gonna go on the other side. I'm gonna go to the Maryland side.
You're going north.
The Maryland?
Yeah.
And
I'm gonna stay close just to make sure my guys are okay.
Okay.
And I'm gonna
So
shoot
tomorrow, and I got a lot of stuff to do tomorrow.
So Kelly.
Give me a chance.
So I think this is where they say that Cleta is in this video. You guys have to help me out here. It's in a very brief moment as they turn the camera around. You see next to Stuart Rhodes there's another guy with a cap, and next to him is, I think, Cleta Mitchell. You can sort of see her in a little hint. She's wearing a mask, a face mask. Apparently that's her.
Okay.
And she's a lawyer, so maybe he's meeting a lawyer.
Not her, but she was just, it doesn't matter, they can just be like, I don't like.
You can't get anything of the audio there. It's just, and they've deliberately said that they didn't capture any of the audio during that particular scene, but during the huddle part. But it is interesting. So this is him breaking the law essentially because he was told to leave town, but he decided not to. He decided to have a meeting with his key co-conspirators who are now up for a sedition conspiracy charge, right? I mean, that's exactly what they're up
Yeah.
for. And, is he now implicated in that? Or what was going on there that they had met, apparently? And it seems to me that they met for the first time then. Is that possible that they met for the first time? Maybe, maybe not. Who knows?
By the way, do you know what one of the elements of a conspiracy charge is? Is a meeting of the minds. So if you wanted to nail a conspiracy shut in a prosecution sense, it would be very helpful if all the members met
In one place. I see.
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Interesting. So, you would suddenly have all the players there because they'd be meeting to discuss this emergency that, the Enrique Tarrio was not going to be around to lead the Proud Boys on January the 6th, which was all the plan all along. He was the guy basically who was going to arrange it all. And suddenly that suddenly all changed. He was not going to be there. And now the Oath Keepers had a bigger role to play, presumably the next morning, or at least they seem to stand out more. That's why they are charged with sedition charges. And I don't believe the Proud Boys are. I don't know if they are charged with sedition conspiracy. Are they?
I think there are so many traitors.
Yeah.
Hard to keep track.
Hard to keep track of. But this is why this January 6 hearings that are coming up in the near future are going to be so important and so fascinating. We spoke a little bit earlier on about how important it is to keep an eye out on these things because democracy is at stake. Well, guess what? The same people who are throwing that little coup attempt are also attempting to throw another one in 2024. And that was the thrust of the story in the New York Times yesterday, which came out. It's quite a shocker. And it all involves, the same person, Cleta Mitchell, and her buddy. I'm sure, Ginny Thomas is not quoted in the story, but I think she's definitely a part of this. And you can absolutely not read it in this. Maybe you can. It's very, very small print. Is that the right story?
So hold on, just so I'm clear and the audience is clear.
Yeah.
So they're gonna do another coup d'état, but they're giving us
Ample
2 years in advance.
Well, they're going to learn. They've learned the lessons, as they say. They've learned the lessons from what happened, and they're going to, they're going to basically function with a bunch of election of spies. I don't know, observers. I'll get to the actual story in a second. We can dissect it, but it's not it looks ridiculous. It looks like it's impossible that someone would do this. On the other hand, these guys have not been Ginny and Cleta have not really been facing any investigation. It seems like they're just seems to be able to continue to plow away at whatever it is they were doing in 2016. They can do in 2020. 2020. They can now do in 2024. It seems that's what I'm gleaning from all this reporting. There's no investigation into Ginny Thomas. There's no investigation into Cleta, and as far as we know. And what I find really fascinating is that the Supreme Court today was able to subpoena demand all the phone records of all the pages.
Oh, yeah.
in the Supreme Court, but they still have not investigated Ginny's involvement in Jan 6 and her, maybe her husband is complicit in something to do with the coup attempt.
Well, the Supreme Court's the Marshal of the Supreme Court, which is a real job title, folks, for those who get a chuckle out of it. The Marshal of the Supreme Court has a remit to investigate potential security breaches at the Supreme Court, like they assume happened with the leak of the Alito memo, I believe it is.
Yep.
And the big story today, and this was kind of a fun one, apparently even some of the clerk staff at the Supreme Court is talking about lawyering up. Which means someone did a bad thing. But the Supreme Court is not going to investigate the wife of a justice planning the overthrow of government. That's going to go to Department of Homeland Security, FBI, whoever else, but probably not the Supreme Court itself. So I'm going to assume that with the open conspiracies that someone's looking at it.
You got to assume, but who knows? So Cleta says that we are taking the lessons we learned in 2020 and we are going forward to make sure they never happen again. Ms. Mitchell told the crowd of 150 activists in training. Basically, she's hiring a bunch of people she's putting you to work, she told them. In the days after the 2020 election, Ms. Mitchell was among a cadre of Republican lawyers who frantically compiled unsubstantiated accusations, debunked claims, and an array of confusing and inconclusive eyewitness reports to build the case that the elections were marred by fraud. Courts rejected the cases and election officials were unconvinced, thwarting a stunning assault on the transfer of power. Now Ms. Mitchell is prepping for the next election, working with a well-funded network of organizations on the right, including the Republican National Committee. She's recruiting election conspiracists into an organized cavalry of activists monitoring elections. That sounds lovely. So there'll be, Ms. Mitchell is marshalling volunteers to stake out election offices, file information requests, monitor voting, work at polling places, and keep detailed records of their work.
So they're marshaling infantry and cavalry and intelligence.
All the military words you could use.
It's like they're declaring a civil war.
Well, you know what's interesting? She actually works for the government. Before he left office, Donald Trump gave her a job. And she apparently still has this job. As far as I can tell, she still has this job at the Elections Assistance Commission. She's a board member of the Election Assistance Commission, which doesn't really have very much power, although it does inform people about what they can do during the elections, like, you know, the chain of custody, best practices, election audits, and election official security. So I don't know how she's doing both these jobs at the same time. She surely cannot be working for the Republican National Committee and the government at the same time. But maybe she can. She's on another board as well. Yeah, she's on another board about civil rights. Can you imagine what that's going to be like? So that's just a brief story we had to share with you because it's really interesting. But I've got lots more to share on CLENA, and I've got lots more to share on that videotape we saw. That'll be coming up next week. Are you ready for the next segment? Because, boy, we're piling them on. Say something, Eric. I've let you not ready to talk about this particular story. So tell us something.
I know it's been like 4 seconds since I've said something. Yeah. I just want more of the huddle there, and also it seemed to be a beeped out thing. You know, he already got fucked out of the PlayStation. I am fascinated now. What did that have to do with anything? Did I hear that correct?
You heard there was something about a PlayStation there, and
it was beeped.
Yeah, I don't know what it was. I don't have no idea what it was. We'll find out.
That's the key to the mystery, folks.
We'll find out later, I guess. Let's turn to, this is a bit of an abrupt turn, but let's turn to the Jan 6, let's turn to the shooting at Uvalde, the massacre at the school at Uvalde in Texas. It's been a week today since that happened. And, you know, mourners are out today. I think the first funeral was held today. And there's a lot of questions around what happened on that day, how many minutes, or maybe 90 minutes it took for the police to officially respond to the shooter. And, that is a tremendously long amount of time and a real issue for everyone involved. And I want to welcome Brandon Wolf to the show. Brandon is a former guest on the show. Brandon was also a survivor of the Pulse nightclub, and he's also an activist in the LGBTQ community since that shooting took place. And, Brandon, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. You haven't ever met Eric, so it's your first chance to say hi to Eric, but there you go.
Hi, nice to meet you, Eric.
As we were discussing last week, all the different scenarios around why it would be, what could possibly delay the police for responding to a shooting like this with kids in a classroom behind a door, only a door and windows on the other side, so many points of access. What would take 90 minutes to gain access to that? And I was reminded by what was an even more excruciating way, or just equally as excruciating, the things that happened at the Pulse nightclub, where you were there, and you had to wait an even longer period of time. Can you describe the events of that night as to why there was so much of a delay and what that delay was all about?
Sure. I think the first thing to say out loud, and I think people need to be frank about this, is that what happened in Uvalde was a completely catastrophic failure of law enforcement agencies to do their job. It was ineptitude, it was cowardice, and as a result, children lost their lives. Mm-hmm. And I also need to say that, as you mentioned, folks in Orlando know what that feels like. We know a sliver of that pain because on June 12th of 2016, we waited 3 hours for police to breach the building at Pulse nightclub. 3 hours where there were people being held hostage in 2 bathrooms in the back of the building. And in a follow-up internal investigation, the Orlando Police Department acknowledged that 13 people died in those bathrooms while they were waiting 3 hours outside to enter the building. Now they have, since made, rationalizations or excuses around why it took them 3 hours to get in the building. They said at the time that the man who was perpetrating the crime had said he had explosive devices, that he'd set them up around the building, and that he was wearing an explosive vest. That turned out to not be true at all. There were no explosive devices on his person, in the building, or in his car, as he claimed. And really, for me, some of the things that came out in the wake of that are quite shocking. While folks were waiting 3 hours, including myself, to learn the fates of our friends, the shooter was on Google teaching himself how to unjam his firearm so that he could continue to fire on people in the club and the police officers trying to breach the building. And again, I think of those 13 people who bled to death on the floor of the bathroom, some of them in the arms of their friends and family members who've gone on to live through hell for the last 6 years. So again, I think it's really important that we call it what it is, ineptitude and cowardice. And I think it raises a really important question, two important questions that I've been asking today. The first one is why? Why, if this is such a common occurrence in this country, decade after decade, do we not have basic procedures that are followed by law enforcement agencies across the board? Why are we seeing the same thing 6 years later after Pulse happening in a school in Uvalde? Why did we see the same thing happen in Parkland when an armed school resource officer didn't go into the building, resulting in the deaths of multiple children? Why are we still seeing these catastrophic failures of law enforcement? And the second question, and maybe the most important one, is why are we still doubling down on this idea that we need to focus on addressing gun violence once the shooter is already in the building? If we have told ourselves that the only way to address this problem is to continue to invest in more police officers at more checkpoints and more armed people inside of school buildings or churches or nightclubs or grocery stores, then we have already resigned ourselves to the fact that gun violence is unavoidable and inevitable in this country, a fact that is simply not true. Our system is not working. None of the things that we've done to prevent gun violence in this country have worked to the degree that they need to. That is true. But what is not true is that gun violence is inevitable. And I just don't see a solution where all we do is continue to invest in the response instead of uprooting it in the first place.
You're absolutely right. I mean, there's just absolutely no excuse for the system not to have learned all the lessons from these shootings. And, you know, you describe 13 people, 13 lives that could have been saved at Pulse nightclub. You describe people being locked in bathrooms, in two bathrooms, if I'm not mistaken, while you were waiting outside. So some people, like in Uvalde, some of the kids got escaped through windows that were broken open. But in this one particular classroom where the shooter was, no one came to rescue them at all for 90 minutes. Very, very similar scenario. When you think about, just if I could ask you a little bit more details about what happened in Pulse, you were there at the start of the shooting, and then you were part of the group that was evacuated, right? Initially evacuated.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
then what
we made
happened?
it out of a door. So I was washing my hands at a bathroom sink when the shooting started. The shooter made his way from inside the front door. He went off to his right through the dance floor. I was off to the left in a separate bar. By the grace of God, I grabbed arms with a bunch of people that I'd never met before and made a sprint for an exit. That was incredibly lucky because that was one of the bathrooms that was ultimately, the last place that many people took their final breaths. And so, we made it outside as police were arriving. Police started to move people down the street. They were carrying assault weapons and wearing body armor, riot gear. They were trying to evacuate the perimeter of the building. And it seemed at that moment that there would be this swift response, that police and fire department would go inside, would begin to rescue people, would eliminate the shooter and save the people that were trapped in the bathroom. Unfortunately, that turned out not to be true. And it was 3 hours later before they used a device to blow open a hole in the side wall of the building and let themselves in that way.
Wow. Why that delay? Did we ever find out what the reason behind the delay was? Or was it just the same kind of thing, just sort of a disagreement on the procedures?
Well, they have said again that, that they feared there were explosive devices, that this person had said there were explosive devices. And that was the reason that they didn't go in. But again, there are still lingering questions for me. One of the questions that I have is the fire department apparently had put in new processes before that. They had gotten new gear. in an attempt to be ready to respond to a mass casualty situation, but they left that gear at the fire department and came totally underprepared for what they were about to find. And so there's a lot of questions for me, again, that came out of this report. And the biggest question is, how are we 6 years later and we're talking about a very similar situation in which 19 children are dead and we haven't learned any lessons?
Because it sounds like the same thing. I mean, they said bombs might have been inside. These guys said he may have barricaded himself. He hadn't really barricaded himself. None of the kids had said that he barricaded himself. The door was just closed. There's no reason to suspect that there was any way for them not to get in. There was a second entrance into the classroom from the back. There's a glass windows on the other side. They could have maybe coming from the top. There are so many ways to access the classroom that it seems stunning that they would wait behind a door, and the idea that he had maybe barricaded himself when he clearly hadn't barricaded himself, we'd have heard about it by now. And it sounds so similar to this idea that there was bombs or some sort of explosive devices in the Pulse nightclub, but there weren't any. So, there's something really clearly broken in our police response and to these shootings. And as you point out, it's not new. It's also happened in Parkland. So it's we're seeing 3 major incidents, and I'm sure there's many more, where you've just got responses to these major shootings that are not living up to our expectations by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, they seem to be making things much worse. Eric, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, just to take a form of devil's advocate here, let's say that we're going to abandon the notion of reducing the number of small arms in the civilian population. The statistics for which, if you have fewer guns, fewer people get shot with them, it's really not up for debate. Not a serious one anyhow. But let's say we abandon all that and say there's going to be guns anywhere, and there's occasionally going to be, mass casualty, mass murder events. Okay, so if we want to have all the freedom, you can't have rights without responsibilities, then, surely our law enforcement can agree that we need a whole lot of investment, and sure, all these millions of gun owners should be, chuck in a couple nickels for this to make sure that the police departments have the special weapons and tactics training that they need, including, some technologies that are, coming to mind, are like drones and other forms of, mobile surveillance, so that, they can there's LiDAR type radar, vision, and, other audio surveillance. There's lots of technologies to know what's going on in a space, right? Everyone's
Social
got a
media.
phone on.
Yeah, phones.
Social media.
Yeah.
You've got, what do they call them? The sharks? I forget the stingrays. That's it. That can gather up very targeted information on everyone's phone in an area and then surveil that. I mean, there are solutions for this if we decided that just we're going to, spread infantry equipment all over the United States. If that's the case, then people should be trained up on how to face this down. And
but they are. I mean, these guys had training 9 weeks ago. They had 9 weeks ago. They went through training where they were told the difference between barricaded and an active shooter, and they still made the wrong decisions. And they've got a full police force just designed to manage the schools over there. 6-member police force. This is what they do for work, and yet
they didn't do any of it.
They didn't do it.
They didn't do any of it. Yeah. And I'll tell you, I'm struggling a little bit with the investment in technology because, again, police forces in this country have an inordinate amount of money. They have incredible investment already. In fact, we saw that last summer, not last summer, sorry, time gets away from me during COVID, but in the summer of 2020, during the Black Lives Matter protests, Orlando rolled out military-style equipment that nobody even really knew they had, with like sound cannons and things like that to try to put down protests. And yet we get into a mass casualty situation where we need them to be highly trained and effective to save lives, and they're unable to do that. So I don't know that I'm buying into this idea that giving the police more technology, that reinvesting in some of these same old tactics is going to answer our issues if they can't even handle the very basics of what they're supposed to be doing, which is making fundamental decisions about when to go in and save children's lives.
Yeah, in fact, I think Uvalde and Pulse nightclub both show that police aren't really equipped to deal with this. They don't deal with it well, and maybe they're not the right approach. Maybe the only approach we have is the gun approach, and we have to ban these AR-15s, and we have to take sensible legislation into account and stop the massacres through what makes sense, which is to ban certain weapons from being sold in the United States. It's the only way that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I come back to this idea that if all we ever do is reinvest and double down our investment in responding to crises, then we're not having an honest conversation with ourselves about how we stop these crises from happening in the first place. I don't just want to shut kids into a prison-like school with the assumption that someone's always going to try to barge through the front door with an AR-15 and unload hundreds of rounds of ammunition into those children. I want to address the root cause. I want to figure out why we have such a crisis in this country. And by the way, it is only happening in this country. We are the only industrialized nation on the face of the planet that has this kind of an issue with gun violence. And we've been told time and time again that all we have to do is just put more guns on the street. That if there were just one more good guy with a gun, forget that there were 19 standing in a hallway in a school in Uvalde. If there were just a 20th, if there were just one more person with their hands on a gun, then maybe all of this could have been averted. Well, guess what? That experiment that we've been trying on our children is not working. We have more guns per capita than any other country on the planet. It's not even close. And no other country has this issue with gun violence. So we have to have an honest conversation about not just how do we respond to crises like this, but how do we stop them from happening in the first place? And
it sounds like in Uvalde and Pulse, just to repeat this, the lives it cost lives. The delay cost lives, many lives. So, in Uvalde, the parents were being held back from going to save their own children. Some of them were armed, but the police were actually holding them back. They could have run in and saved their own children if they were allowed to. And they were just
very similar for us. I was held back by police officers from going in and trying to find my best friends. One of them died on an operating table, but the other never made it off that dance floor. And sure, maybe it wouldn't have been the best idea for me to charge in head first into a war zone, but they weren't doing it.
Yeah. And, and imagine if you're the parent of a 10-year-old child or an 8-year-old child, you would want to run in. I'm absolutely sure you would want to run in, and you would do whatever you could to save your kid's life. And you can't blame a parent for wanting to do that, but you certainly can blame the police for not doing it themselves. I mean, it seems ridiculous. There were 19 officers outside. None of them felt that they needed to get into that classroom. It seems unbelievable.
Also, if we're talking Second Amendment, well-regulated militia, because, we have professional police, we have a state-run National Guard, and we have a standing army that's the most powerful fighting force in the history of mankind. But there's still this discussion about we need random citizens to have firearms, in case anything else happens. Right. We understand that they're not going to invade, we don't expect the school moms to invade Iran. We'll send the Marines and the Navy. Okay, but we need all these guns around for something that might happen in our hometown. Well, what else could that be if not there's a shooter in the school? Mm-hmm. And are we saying that we don't, the point you just made, there were people that were armed and, they're like, I'm going in. And speaking as a father of school-age children, I could not live with myself if I did not go and take that risk to try and stop harm. A couple slugs in the sternum are nothing compared to what I'd be feeling after the fact. So wait a minute. Do you expect a guy like me to run in armed to save my kids as part of a well-regulated militia? Or are the police really the only people that can make any of those decisions in those situations, even if their decision is to let everybody die? What is it you want us to do with the millions of civilian firearms? Just traffic them to the Sinaloa cartel? Sell them on the black market, or defend our kids with it? I'd just like a little clarification here.
Yeah, that gets to the hypocrisy at the core of the argument, right? Which is we've been told all along that we're hoarding these guns for some mysterious or fantastical moment when they're needed, and at the end of the day, when it's time to use them, there are people not even being allowed to use them. And it really has been a lie perpetrated by gun manufacturers and the gun lobby to sell more guns. There's a book that I read that's actually quite fascinating that's called The Gunning of America. And it talks about the origins of the Second Amendment and also our obsession with easy access to firearms. It talks about how guns for most of our history were seen as practical tools, that they were to hunt and keep your property safe from coyotes and bears and mountain lions and all of that sort of thing, right? And then there came a time when society was urbanizing that there wasn't actually the need for the glut of guns that were being produced. And so this group of gun manufacturers, who were actually at one time textile manufacturers, they were t-shirt makers, got together and started talking about a marketing strategy to sell these guns that they had produced a glut of. And part of the process was, instead of these guns being seen as a practical tool, that they would be seen as something of emotional value, that they would be tied to someone's, patriotism or masculinity. They started marketing guns to teenage boys, and that created the culture of gun obsession that we see today. So I encourage folks, it was a really fascinating read for me, done by a historian. I forget what her name is, but it's The Gunning of America. And I think it gets at the heart of some of what you're talking about, which is this sort of phony obsession that we have with guns being tied to, a patriotism, or, that we are somehow going to rise up as some individual militia. When in reality, it's a lie that's been perpetrated by gun manufacturers so they can make more money.
Exactly. I want to ask you before you go. Sorry, go ahead, Eric.
That book, by the way, The Gunning of America: Business and the Making of American Gun Culture, is by Pamela Haag, Haag, and it's available on Amazon and elsewhere.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric. I want to ask you about the shooter himself. In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, there were claims, and they were wrong. Every single one of these claims was wrong, but there were claims amongst the right wing, sort of, the crazy wingnut part of the right wing, that the shooter was trans. The shooter is not trans, but the allegation was that he was, or that they were. Can you explain to everyone how significant that is? Because what we've seen in the subsequent days is a spreading of this false information that has really gone from every right-wing outlet to every other right-wing outlet, through Marjorie Taylor Greene to Paul Gosar to you name it. All the typical suspects have now declared to the extreme far right, or if they are, maybe just the right wing these days, declared to the GOP that the shooter was trans, in a way to weaponize the shooting against gay people and trans people. Can you talk a little bit about the effects of that?
There is a deep sickness in this country around how people are responding to marginalized communities, and very specifically to transgender people. I'm here in the state of Florida, and I've seen it firsthand as our governor has turned the transgender community into his political punching bag in an effort to build himself the resume to run for president in 2024. And not only is it deeply disturbing, this strange obsession that the right wing has with people who are simply trying to live their lives and make it from one day to the next, but it's also incredibly dangerous. We warned about this when Governor DeSantis, in his fury and rage at how the conversation around his Don't Say Gay bill was going, unleashed his communications team online to say anyone who disagrees with him on that issue is a pedophile. They started calling people, quote, groomers. And that took over the zeitgeist. It was being repeated by Laura Ingraham and Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity and Ben Shapiro. And before you knew it, everybody who was LGBTQ was being slapped with this incredibly dangerous label. And what happened almost immediately after that, there was a pair of dads who were on a train with their children from Los Angeles up the coast, and they were confronted by someone who was, very clearly upset by the rhetoric that he'd heard coming out of Florida, who tried to separate them from their own child, telling the child that that their parents weren't really their parents, that they were rapists trying to kidnap him, and trying to physically remove that child from the parents. So I say all of that because this very strange obsession that has morphed into sick and twisted rhetoric about transgender people has real life consequences. It's happening whether it's the two dads on a train, or it's the transgender people whose lives are being stolen from us every single day. Black trans women in this country are still at far higher risk of violence and murder than any other community. We haven't addressed that crisis, and it's being made worse when you have not just these sort of 4chan channels that were once the obscure, far extreme right that people sort of ignored, but powerful people in this country with very large megaphones echoing completely bogus conspiracy theories in an effort to further their agenda, their tirade against transgender people. And unfortunately, I think this is what's most disturbing for me, is that for those powerful people, those politicians, it's all about politics. It's not about the mental or physical health outcomes for transgender people. It's not about any of the things they claim it's about. It is all about being famous, seeing their name trend on social media, about being on a Fox News chyron one more time that week. And it ultimately costs trans people their safety, their mental and physical well-being, and in many cases, their lives.
In some ways, all the talk about thoughts and prayers, well said, by the way, is kind of crazy when you think the first reaction that they had was to try and weaponize the shooter's identity as an illegal immigrant and as a trans person and whatever else they were trying to throw at him, mental health and everything else. I mean, it seems unbelievable, but that would be their first reaction, would be to try and weaponize the shooter's identity like that. It's just stunning.
It makes sense. I mean,
go ahead,
Eric.
I was just going to say, this is DARVO, is deny, accuse, reverse, victim, and offender. DARVO. Who are the victims of violence more? Is LGBTQ communities and trans people in particular. Who is committing the violence? Institutions, for example, that whole groomer thing you're talking about coming up. They've said any discussion of gender or sexuality issues with kids at all, that's grooming behavior, when in reality we're just starting to tear into the child sex trafficking networks around the world. Yes, it was tarred with the whole QAnon thing, and we've had a number of people try and weaponize that discussion, but there are investigations into these crime cartels, into the Scientologists, where into, like here in Missouri, the Agape Ranch School, Camp Kanakuk, and these institutions that traffic kids between states, between countries, and are grooming them to a life of servitude and abuse. And then that's being whipped around on somebody that wants to, have the book My Two Dads out for somebody. And, that's reversing the victims and the offenders just in time as some of the truth is starting to come out in ways I don't think people have seen. I do a lot of research into this, and we are starting to appreciate the scale and depravity of these activities, abusing children in particular, and that controls through blackmail a lot of our politicians. It's the story of the century that's coming out, and now there are these violent events, and then we go, it must be somebody who's trans. Yes, I'm sure, except for the fact that that is not the profile of the last 30 mass murderers.
Yeah. It's also interesting politically. That region is a region that turned mysteriously from Democrat to Republican to help Trump win Texas, and the Republicans win Texas last time around. So it's interesting that they're trying to push a narrative which is sort of anti-trans, and it really would appeal to sort of a more conservative Latino population or a voter population there. But that's something for another day to cover. Brandon, I know you've got to go, but I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be with us tonight. Do you want to tell people where they can reach you, and also a little bit about your organization and what they can do to support you?
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate it. You can find me on social media. I have a whole bunch of different handles, but if you look for Brandon Wolf, I'm sure you'll find me on Instagram, on Twitter, on TikTok. I'm not very good at that, but I do my best. So find me, connect with me. I'd love to keep the conversation going. I think, one of the things that I'm most passionate about right now is not getting stuck in the same sort of circular motion that we always go through. Politicians rely on it. They've come to count on us. Not being able to find any agreement, the headlines moving on so they can coast from crisis to crisis without actually having to do their jobs. And my hope is that, we can galvanize ourselves and come up with some kind of solution. I don't know what it is, but we've got to do something different for our kids. We've got to do something different for the next generation. So find me there. I am the press secretary at Equality Florida, which is the state's LGBTQ civil rights organization. So I'm very proud to not only fight to end gun violence in this country, but also to ensure that all people are treated with dignity and respect, that every single young person is protected no matter who they are, who they love, or how they identify. So as I mentioned, check me out on social media. Let's stay connected. I'd love to keep the conversation going.
You do a great job as that spokesperson. So thank you so much, Brandon Wolf, and we'll see you again, hopefully in the future. Thanks for being on Narrative tonight.
Thank you.
Isn't it great? Just a terrific spokesperson for not only the LGBTQ right issues, but now it's just listening to talk about the shooting and being a voice for the people who can't really talk right now, which is those kids that are dead. They have no way of expressing themselves, and other kids can't express themselves. So to have someone like Brandon talk about their concerns around the delay and things like that as a victim of shooting is so powerful, really, really powerful.
Yeah. I didn't realize the degree to which this sort of sudden feigned inability to rush in and
exactly.
And deploy the skills that we pay dearly for in our country here. I didn't realize how repetitive that was. I knew there were certain events, but I didn't realize that it was 3 hours for a whole squad of police to deal with one guy.
Yeah, I didn't realize that either. I just remembered there was such a long delay until I spoke to Brandon and I said, how long was that delay? And he was like, it's 3 hours. And I was like, can you imagine 3 hours, 3 agonizing hours stuck in bathroom stalls in a nightclub with a shooter out there shooting people? And if I'm not mistaken, they actually had to open the windows to escape the bathrooms. People actually used their own found ways of breaking through the windows to escape those bathrooms. And so it's very similar. It just seems so similar. It just seems like it's the same mistake again. And it's the same mistake that was made in Parkland. And why are we making these mistakes? And what's the point of the police if we keep making these same mistakes? It just doesn't, it doesn't make sense.
For folks that are law and order and are all into personal responsibility, I mean, what do we keep hearing? Oh, well, we just forgot to turn on the body cams. Oh, we didn't file the report. Oh, I don't like wearing my taser. I just wear my service revolver. So for those kind of, events like, oops, sorry, we had to just, kill the guy who's mentally ill and naked in the middle of the street, or apparently a pregnant woman in Missouri today. And then in stuff like this, it's like, oh, we did take training on that, but, we weren't quite sure. So we just sat around and that's a weird, you combine that, and he pointed out, isn't it interesting that when certain things were determined to be important by not sure who, but like in 2020, when there was all the post George Floyd, the supposed, opposing of Antifa on the way up to getting us used to federal troops on the way to January 6th attack on the democracy, that there was military hardware. It kind of reminds me of in Ferguson here in the fall of 2014. All of a sudden, this Department of Homeland Security military equipment is out with the St. Louis County Police. And gosh, they had, when it was a bunch of unarmed kids, they were Johnny on the spot with sniper rifles, mine-resistant personnel carriers. But then you have these folks when a school's getting shot up, it's like, oh, I don't want to stub my toe or whatnot.
You remind me of something that I wanted to raise and I didn't. And I'm just going to if I could just quickly do it. I know you got to go, but the idea that we have a symbiotic relationship between the crime and the police, and the crime and the media companies that are reporting on this, and the crime and the lawyers, and the crime and the court system. All that ecosystem is one ecosystem that needs each other to survive. So, in order for all those things to keep going and to thrive, it needs the crime to keep happening. And so it's just the reality of the system. That's how it's fine. It's the way it's been built, but it can create opportunities for enormous corruption and enormous manipulation. And that's what concerns me, is that, is the reason we're seeing such an enormous amount of gun violence in America, why are we such an outlier nation? Is it because someone has found a way to manipulate that ecosystem? And that to me is where we really have to understand and investigate. And we need to do that on a national basis. It can't be done on a local basis, and it's critically important.
I'll tell you from some of my analysis, when you look at where some of like the where police violence was happening in the summer of 2020 there, or some of the police shootings of unarmed African-American men in particular. It's very interesting. And guys like Trump and other propagandists would name check this a little bit. These are all Democrat cities. Well, here's the thing. You look that up. That's not necessarily wrong. You know, St. Louis, Louisville, Minneapolis, these places might be quite conservative out in the exurbs, but they're run, you know, the urban areas are Democrat run, and some of them are, or many of them are on the very traditional organized crime logistics routes that date back to Prohibition, that are the routes for originally booze, but then drugs, guns, and of late, human beings. And, you know, there's so much money that flows through. Those are the places, you know, not some podunk place in Wyoming where they have schools. They could run in and do, you know, they could shoot, you know, 20 people. But it's interesting. It's these places where the police might be in a position to be bribed by, you know, international cartels, where some of these worst things happen. And that's where they have the most police, and they're the best trained, and they're the best financed. But there's plenty of, like, I'm from rural Vermont. I like to name check it. We have plenty of lunatics and tons of guns. And you know, I mean, real lunatics, right, guys? You know, and mental illness, and schools and synagogues and churches. And, you know, we don't have this. And, or it's somewhat rare, but these cities that are, to put a term to it, really mobbed up. It's interesting how that's the pattern. You know, I can't assign causation to it yet, but
it does feel like a pattern. It just feels like a pattern. I mean, you've got these three shootings. The same thing happened in each of these shootings. We've had 20 years. How can we not possibly know? How can we not possibly have learned our lesson? It's just, you know, it's a pattern once you factor that in. It just, to me, is very, very troubling. And now we hear that the police, the school and the police department of Uvalde won't even cooperate with the investigation, the federal investigation.
I did see that tonight.
Telling, I think, if you're not going to investigate, what exactly are you so afraid of that you can't, you know, go to the DOJ to do an independent investigation of one of the biggest tragedies in the world, but certainly in America? Why can't you participate in that? What on earth is causing you not to participate? Good question.
And it's interesting that there are places, and I think Brandon, you know, pointed this out. There are places that will have an event like this. Anders Breivik, who the Norwegian guy who shot up, I believe, summer camp on an island, I think.
Yeah.
You know, terrible school shooting in Scotland, one in, I think, Tasmania, in Australia. And after that, the nations ground to a halt and said, everybody turn your guns in. And they did, and they've never had this stuff happen again.
Well, Jacinda Ardern, who's in town today, the New Zealand Prime Minister, you know, who's in town today, her reaction to the shootings in New Zealand was remarkable and quick and swift. And they banned AR-15s and a whole lot of other things. And she, in fact, was congratulating President Biden on his enormous track record and influence on Ukraine and a bunch of other things, which we're not hearing about. We're only hearing about what he's failing at, and which, of course, he's not. It's just all been happening, you know, it's happening because it's happening. But it's tremendously great that Jacinda Ardern was in town, and it's so positive about President Biden. I hope everyone spends time listening to that press conference. But, you know, you talk about an example with someone, and I don't know why I'm suddenly all pink, but there you go, I turned pink. But Jacinda Ardern is one of those people who was able to do that because they had a different rule system. They, like Canada, have a different system of rule. The Prime Minister or the President has opportunities there to do things independently, but not everybody has that system, and the United States is a much more representative system. We just have to keep fighting until these rules are changed, until these AR-15s cannot be allowed on American streets. It seems ridiculous that a weapon of war is allowed on the streets.
You know, I think Brandon brought up that book, and then I did not know it was T-shirt manufacturers that were behind sort of the popularization of assault weapenry. That's deeply interesting, and I'd love to know the schmata business turned into the gun business.
Yes, it wouldn't surprise me. It's all the same crowd. It's all the same crowd.
Oh, he went there with Jewish organized crime, the schmata business.
The schmata business.
Textiles.
I didn't say Jewish. I just said, you know,
Oh, come on. If it's in Yiddish, come on now. We can drop
Schmata.
the mask on that one.
It's a good term. Hey, Eric, it's another good show. We did 3 segments today. We've never done that before, and we did it. We succeeded. So, yay to us. And we'll be back on Thursday. And anything else you want to promote? Anything you want to talk about? Game theory today, or anything else that you want to share? Other than the fact that you're now Russian sanctioned.
I still want to call out China and Saudi. I feel like this is like a professional wrestling show. Like, I'm looking for you. You're too chicken to sanction me. So maybe again, maybe Belgium wants to sanction me. I'm looking for more people.
Bring it. He wants
Bring it on.
Let's get him sanctioned. Eric Garland needs to be sanctioned by as many dictatorial countries in the world as possible. On that note, thank you very much for being here tonight. We'll be back on Thursday. Narrative is made possible by viewers like you. Join today and support truly independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative. That's patreon.com/narrative.